And then today's agenda, what we want to do today is we really have a packed agenda. We're going to introduce the Peaceful Futures Project. Then we're going to talk about storytelling and visualization. We're going to have an immersive storytelling experience as well. We're going to talk about a Peaceful Futures white paper. We will have some interactive reflections where we would want you to participate as well. And we've also got a guest from Humanity United. So overall, we really have a packed session and we're super excited to get started. And with that, then I'm going to hand over to Abby Noakes. She's the director of networks and one of her at SWAF, School of International Futures. And one of her tasks is to strengthen the NGFP network. And she'll do the introduction on the Peacebuilding Futures Project, partners, who the partners are that's involved, the origins of the manifesto briefly, etc. So Abby Noakes, I'm handing over to you.
Thanks, Johan, and a personal huge thanks to all of you for joining today, and especially so for our organising team and all of our partners. As Johan mentioned, I'm here representing the School of International Futures, and one of the honours that I have is in being part of a team that facilitates the next generation foresight practitioners. And we're going to hear from a number of them later today. I'm just going to speak for a couple of minutes and then hand to Anastasia, one of the next generation foresight practitioners and also part of the ZORLab team, who is one of the other convening kind of partners for this initiative. And indeed, the person who founded this project and got it all started about 12 months ago. So I won't speak for long and I'll hand to her in a second. Thijs, if we could just go back one slide just for a sec, thank you. Before I jump into the why of the project and the how of the project, I just wanted to take a minute actually to reflect on, I guess, the more human side of why we've brought this project together. So there is an academic side, there is a pragmatic reason for bringing this project together, but there's also a highly personal one. And that is that a great number of our next generation foresight practitioners, as well as others who are part of this, this partnership, have been experiencing and are experiencing conflict firsthand, and experiencing and working with those that are affected by conflict. And from my perspective, working for the School of International Futures, this project for me initiated from both a pragmatic perspective, which I'll tell a bit more about in a second, but also a highly personal one, that we want to be responsive to our network members. We feel like we have a duty of care to respect and honour the position that our members are in, and that includes conflicts that we're all aware of that are going on in Ukraine and Russia at the moment, those in Sudan at the moment, but also those we might be less familiar with that are slightly smaller and less covered conflicts as well, such as those that are working with migrants affected by conflict in Mexico and a number of other stories as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we spoke to that piece that is part of the rationale for coming to this project. The second rationale for all of us, and which these images speak to, is that over the past number of years, SWAF has been doing some work to examine what are the different ways that futures and foresight could actually interact with the peacebuilding sector. And I use peacebuilding sector broadly because I know that it does mean different things to different people. And there are four reasons or four kind of main buckets where we think that there is a really interesting intersection between futures and foresight and peacebuilding. The first, which the image on the left represents, is that we can see how futures and foresight can actually be part of the conflict process and the reconciliation process through prevention, through mediation, through reconciliation. The second is that we can use foresight as a way of understanding and aligning with some of the systems mapping and the systems thinking. So it can intersect with systems thinking as a way of bringing a more dynamic perspective to how we can use how we can think about the emerging complex systems and the way that the world is shifting. The third, which this middle image represents, is that we recognise that conflict itself is going to be a shifting and emerging is going to be shifting, emerging over the next 10 to 20 years. Technology is changing, values are shifting, and the Futures and Foresight process can enable us to map where some of those changes are likely to happen and anticipate how we might want to collectively work in contexts where the future of conflict might look very different to how conflict unfolds today. And the final, which is the bottom right image, is looking at how Futures and Foresight as a highly participatory process can be a really effective way of bringing lesser heard and often forgotten voices into the process of conflict resolution and peace building. And this is particularly looking at the role of women, the role of youth, the role of different marginalized communities and how they can be part of the conflict resolution and peace building process. We can share all of sort of work that SWAF and other partners on this call have been doing. We're really happy to share examples of that and to share some case studies for where we've been working with the OECD, with the Women, Peace and Security network, as well as others, to share more examples of this. But how this panned out in the context of this project is that we were really focusing on two of these pieces. The first, with the white paper and the roadmap, is how Futures and Foresight can be used to understand complex systems and understanding drivers of change and looking at the different systems such as education and culture that also intersect with conflict. And Anastasia and Pavel will speak more to that later. And then the second part of this project is around how can we use participatory methods and creative processes of Futures and Foresight to provoke and create new narratives. And what you will see in this manifesto, and what I invite you to do in this manifesto, is to really listen to these stories as provocations. We're not asking you to look at these stories as predictions of what the future might look like in 50 years' time. We're inviting you to see these stories as warnings, as potential opportunities, and as potential journeys, and to really look beneath the surface of what is contained within those stories. If we could go to the next slide, please, Thijs. So the purpose today and bringing you all together is largely twofold. The first is to hopefully inspire you. So we are going to be listening to 5 of our 11 authors tell you some of their stories and create an immersive experience so that you can really step into the worlds that they've created and to think about how you might want to use these stories, because they will be a public good. They're already on the website, or if not, they will be shortly, and we'll share a link to that. They will be a public good that you can use in conversations with your communities to provoke conversation. So please see them as such. Don't see them as predictions. And then the second is a call to action. We see this project as a pilot to look at how Futures and Foresight can be valuable in the peace building space. This is the start of a journey, and we're opening a number of conversations now around how we can apply Futures and Foresight in different contexts within this sector. And we invite you to think about how you'd like to do that alongside us. That's all from me for now. So I'm going to hand over to Anastasia, who, as I mentioned earlier, is a very active NGFP member, and this whole project is her brainchild, really. So Anastasia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Abby. So I will just spend a few minutes to kind of bring you to the roots of this project and how it all started. So yeah, I'm Anastasia, and here I represent Vzorlab project, and we are doing projects connected with futures, arts and culture. And we initiated this project last spring, so actually more than a year ago. And our Vzorlab project was already functioning globally. And in 2020, we got a humanitarian award of Next Generation Foresight practitioners. And at that time, geographically, most part of the team was based in Russia, and part of the team already left the countries due the conflict happening. And as we have been engaged into foresight activities, and in the same time we were acting in the field of culture, I thought it is like really very important to start an impactful project in this area. It was important, like both personally and professionally. It was really quite a difficult period for all of us when we sometimes had to change jobs, countries, friends, and even mindset. Can we go to the next slide, please? As we all know, like lots of wars are happening around the globe. And we think it's very important to spread peaceful futures mindset in order to prevent conflicts happening. And in the end, it is about people understanding each other better. It is about awareness and compassion. And we think that it is about strategic peace building, because normally like lots of peace building activities happen after the conflict already happened. And we feel that probably some right foresight activities, actions could maybe prevent Ukrainian conflict, and maybe could prevent some other conflicts which will happen later in the world. We feel that foresight community could bring more power into that. And we see our project as a prototype, which can help bring some local initiatives into life. And in the end, it will help us to achieve peaceful futures. We think that this project is just a start. So in spring, I had a talk with Kat Tully, who is the founder of School of International Futures. And we decided we should do that project and invite young voices represented by new generation foresight practitioners, and add our professional touch of arts and culture, and which was also supported by the Manifesto part, which we will cover later in this session. And thanks a lot to NGFP who led this part. Next slide, please. So we gave project a go, and we had a few workshops during the year. Main of the workshops are listed here. So we talked about like war and peace in general. We covered culture, education, governance. Like we did, I think, 2 more workshops, smaller ones. But in general, we have done a lot of work. And we were looking for futures insights using different methods, discussions, arts practices. And our announcement got quite a lot of attention and support. And in all, we had around 100 participants from over 30 countries, from all over the world. And we feel it was very important for us and our participants to talk about their issues on a really multicultural level. Thank you, and I pass my word to Thijs.
Great, thank you, Anastasia, and thank you, Abby, as well. That's fine. I'm going to quickly introduce Thijs. Thank you for the background information, and to get us started, we're now going to introduce Thijs Prado. So Thijs is a storyteller, a screenwriter, and a filmmaker. And she facilitated the storytelling workshops for this process with the authors, and also supported their creative processes for the production of the Peaceful Futures Manifesto. So she will share with us why we do the storytelling and introduce the storytellers for an immersive experience. So Thijs, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Johan. Yeah, so as I wrote in the introduction of the manifesto, I think the best approach to learn from speculative storytelling in foresight is to hold both an open heart to receive the story as is, but also a sharp mind to kind of unpack the layers of meaning in those stories and discover what's insightful about each scenario that a story brings, right? So what kind of social, technological, environmental, economic, and political aspects each story brings to us, and what are the key drivers of change, the core values, the pitfalls of a certain future. So before we begin, I wanted to share with you this kind of exercise that I conducted with the Manifesto storytellers. And before we actually go to the visualization of the exercise itself, I wanted to share this image with you just to explain what I mean when during the exercise I say the web of infinite possibilities. So imagine that you are this little blue person closer to the screen, and then you can just navigate through all these dots of possibilities, and you can land in the future, which is that little person further on the screen that I marked here. So for this exercise, I want you to imagine that you are this little person here, and you can fly above all these dots, these infinite possibilities of reality, and land on that dot, which marks your preferred future 50 years from now, where peace is already a reality. And the only thing that I ask you as we do this exercise is to suspend disbelief and allow yourself to dream a little bit about peace and enjoy what your mind brings to you right now. You don't have to take this too seriously. This is just an exercise to activate your creativity. So let's begin. Feel free now to turn off your camera if you feel more comfortable doing that. If not, that's fine. Then please close your eyes and make sure that you are sitting in a comfortable position. And take a nice deep breath in and let it go. And one more time. And another one. Great. Now, keeping your eyes closed, I want you to imagine that you can navigate freely through the web of infinite possibilities. And imagine that you are taking your feet off the ground and just flying above all these dots of infinite possibilities and observing them. Look at all the dots. Maybe some of them are brighter than others. Just allow yourself to observe the vastness of possibilities right now. Now find the dot which holds the time and the space of your preferred future, your preferred peaceful future, 50 years from today. Maybe you feel a pull to a specific dot. Maybe a dot will shine a bit brighter for you. Just allow yourself to land there. Feel your feet touching the ground of your preferred future. And try to visualize as many details as possible. What are the colors and shapes of this future? What sounds does it have? How does it smell or taste? What's the feeling in your skin and in your heart? Just observe and let it tell you how it is. Now, as you start walking in this particular future, you find a guide, someone, human or non-human, that is already experiencing your preferred future as a lived reality. Say hi. They are offering you a quick free tour. Let them show you around and allow your 5 senses to tell you what it may be even difficult to put in words right now. You have a unique chance to ask them questions and listen to their answers. Let them speak, even if that surprises you. You may want to ask, how did they manage to build such a world? What did they have to do or give up on? What was the most difficult thing they had to deal with? What helped? Who helped? Was there a key decision made at some point that changed everything? Let their answers sink in your body, mind, and heart for a moment. And as much as you possibly have many more questions to your guide right now, they now advise you to absorb what they told you and gently ask you to go back to 16 May 2023, where you came from, and share this wisdom with humanity in the hope that one day this peaceful future among all the possibilities becomes our lived reality. Now, thank your guide for your guide for the tour and the conversation. Say your goodbyes. It's time to go back. See yourself going off the ground and flying again above all the web of infinite possibilities. And allow yourself to slide to the dot that holds the here and now, where your body currently is, where you are right now. Feel your body in your chair again. Feel your feet firm on the ground of where you are. Take nice deep breaths. Make small, gentle moves with your body. And when you feel ready, open your eyes again, being fully present in the here and now. Open your camera again, if you feel like. And we're going to start listening to our storytellers who built the Peaceful Futures Manifesto. Isayo, let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Still in my 10 seconds. The roots in a friendship. As Fola takes a walk, she scrolls through her timelines on various social media platforms, and all she sees are the now normalized headlines. Food wars, inflation, hunger, agroterrorism. If only we could move past this post-truth world and begin resolving this mess in a peaceful way, she signs. Distracted by her phone, Fola trips on a tree along her path, and in a second, the atmosphere changes. The sky bluer, the grass is greener. The air feels so clean, and the environment are so calm and peaceful. She checks her smartwatch and sees something strange. 16th October 2075. What? She signs. I see you stumbled on my ancestor. Fola is startled and looks around desperately for who just spoke to her. Fear not, dear Fola, you just got teleported to the future your thoughts so desperately desired. In that instant, she realizes the tree was actually talking to her. Welcome. How about you disconnect for a moment from your 2023 chaotic reality and let me show you around this future called Efronshire. The tree takes her on a journey showing her all the marvels of Efronshire. Of all the things the tree showed Fola, her favorite was the collective urban garden, where people get to pick as much fruit as they need, and the urban poor were well nourished by the abundance of this garden. After going around Efronshire, the tree says to her, as you have seen, Efronshire now lives according to the core values of empathy, collectivism, and network altruism. This is why foresight has become our way of life. As the tree talks, Fola's smartwatch starts to flicker. Keeps switching between 2075 and 2023. It is time to go back. So sad, she doesn't want to go back to that state of constant crisis. The tree comforts her, letting her know she now has an important mission, which is to plant the seed of that very tree in the present. Fola plucks the seed of the lowest hanging fruit, and her watch stabilizes in 2023.
A long time passed until I grew up and became the biggest tree in the area. Somehow, I was overgrown with legends, received different names, and became a place for connection. I saw how the new type of human's urban life started to grow around me. I guess at that point we all realized that we can survive and avoid disasters only with co-respect and co-creation. Eventually, I died. That happens with trees when some caterpillars have their population explosion. But that's what I love about humans: creativity and your ability to learn. The legends around me made people want to symbolically appreciate my life, and the local community invited an artist to create some kind of installation in my memory. The artist worked in the bioart field, exploring the language of plants. Together with scientists and technicians, they found the other trees close to my biotype and yet resistant to the disease that killed me, perfected a system, implanted the DNA fragments, and gave me a new form of life. I was once seeded with love and then recreated with art and science. And now I live with some built-in sensors that read my performance. Artists transform them into a language of video and sounds. Scientists are looking for new ways to support and develop natural life. My new life marked the beginning of lots of interesting research work in the ways the biopresence of other interspecies, DNA in their other body. It enables new forms of communication and understanding, a new way to support the Earth's ecosystem in balance. You humans call this a fancy term, implementing the regenerative economy at all levels. But for oaks, it simply means remaining true to the roots, breathing, doing what we were designed to do.
For a long time, the system worked quite well. Every day, each human would create an avatar as part of their routine and set a daily scenario to experience. There was only one rule: no interaction with other creatures. That was a taboo. The logic behind that idea was to avoid conflict, but the inhabitants paid an enormous price for that because it neglected a big part of the human's essence, being social.
Hale loved using memes and video clips to try to shape local conversations and guide communities toward de-escalation. She'd had recent success with the method during a near riot in Caracas, but she was much more familiar with the local media landscape there.
Today is my 18th birthday, and it is the day I make one of the biggest decisions of my life: to go against the life that will be chosen for me. I am doing this because I believe in taking hold of my own future, instead of having someone else decide what my life will be. The elders in our village feel as if they know everything, and that our future lies in the stories of our past. They have told us time and time again about the origins of Payapa, of how we collaborated and joined together as the last remaining residents of Earth. It was all in disarray when the Great Move happened, and the people left behind were left to pick up the pieces. Most of those who moved expected the last human society on Earth to collapse, but it was in our trials that we were able to find our way forward. No one imagined that once the wealthy and elite left our home, we could redefine what society looked like and focus on building our communities. It took guidance from the native caretakers of the land, the keepers of indigenous knowledge and ways of being, for us to build a peaceful and sustainable society. The ruins of our world lay around us, and one of the remaining traditions is celebrating a milestone on your 18th birthday. On this day, I finally become an adult and find my place in the society we have built. But can I really call it finding my place when it's being decided for me? Before we are able to begin the festivities, every young person in our village stands beside me as I make the call for change. Let us live our purpose, is what we plead.
Kamel was pained to see yet another generation's potential dwindling away. But what could he do to break the cycle? His questioning grew into a sense of responsibility and commitment to understanding how people from different communities, geographies, affiliations, and generations perceived their mutual relations. He was obsessed with understanding how the past was still shaping realities and affecting people's daily lives. He was sure he was not the only one feeling post-traumatic effects. On his 30th birthday, and forever missing his friends, Campbell started creating safe spaces of discussion and exchange within his community.
Peace, spiraling into the unknown, taking their hand, therapeutic guide, whom he had begrudgingly entrusted with the sources of his fears and tales of unfulfilled desires, unsure of the journey they will take him on, past, present, and now into the future. Trembling heart, exhausted mind, tingling skin, melancholic eyes, all that heaviness would gently cease to occupy his being. Surrendering, opening up into the vulnerably emergent, he flows forth. Colourful, oh so abundant this world is, each being beautifully different from the next. Creative plurality is the way of life here. Bodies conversing and converging, humans and their fellow creatures finding serenity in each other's presence. And in the middle of it all, he is lost in unfamiliarity. Where were the playground bullies, controlling partners, detached fathers, divisive tyrants, and roamers in uniform? Authoritarian aggression, competitive hustle, emotional withdrawal, deep-seated paranoia, hatred and disdain, the grand demonic gravity of it all has loosened its grip. Here, where tears are comforted and laughs celebrated, land without border, community without governance, souls interdependent and yet free to just be. It happened. They came together in struggle, solidarity, movement, and the conviction that a world beyond fearful categories and binaries was possible. Live with all the colors of the rainbow, this is a community that chooses to love in every sense. The justice of Sukoon. If only he had had the courage to embrace it sooner, what joy it would have been to have lived a while longer.
It was a dark and stormy night when I received the call. My heart was pounding as I answered, unsure of what to expect. "It's done," said the voice on the other end. "We've done it." I remember when the first assembly was called for the New World Treaty, I couldn't shake off that feeling of unease, even though the treaty was a milestone, monumental actually, ensuring the protection of all living things and the preservation of the planet. I couldn't help but think, what if it is all a trap? But my doubts lingered as we entered the grand hall filled with dignitaries from all over the world. The first interspecies assembly of this magnitude, with their representative flags flickering on the table holograms. People all over the world, the plant and animal kingdoms, and even the celestial realms were tired of the ongoing conflicts and the threats, the constant competition and fight for survival. All the while, our planet withered. We were at the tipping point, even without the threat of nuclear war, which came much too close, much too many times than I can bring myself to admit. This dark shadow remained cast over our future. More citizens of the world turned away from us and looked instead locally to their communities, which operated on a strict no weapons policy. Held up by our youngest and bravest, idealists, we joked at the time, expecting it all to crumble. But maybe we were the fools, too entrenched in our past. Disarm or disengage was the motto that really set things into motion. And given that our fate was tied to the natural environment, well, it was time for a change. One that didn't threaten our existence, or that of all living things. One by one, communities went to each other with their demands and concerns, agreeing terms of engagement and accountability. They cut across artificial borders of the old world so vehemently held on to, the ones that so naively separated us from not only each other, but from the rest. We knew then, it's now or never. And there it was, the New World Treaty.
So, you've been successful in keeping peace for some time already. I asked them casually. Will it still be there in another 15 years? The huge kangaroo eyes seemed to be smiling in the middle of my question already. And I hear in my head an honest answer. I don't know.
Great. Thanks. This was, well, I almost want to just keep a moment of silence because this was a incredible experience. Thank you for presenting it so neatly and so immersive, really. So I'm tasked to have a conversation in 5 minutes, which would not be possible. But maybe just some themes around these videos if we reflect and the stories really. There's interesting themes. There's something about local. There's something about using art and social media as peace-building tools. There's something about intergenerational decision-making, reconnecting with the past and ancestors, interspecies communication, that peace should not be taken for granted. I think two things maybe, and it would be good to just have comments from one or two of the authors. The first thing that stood out for me, linking to all these stories, or most of them, is a climate undercurrent. In a sense, climate is also a source of conflict because it's about resources. But given the stories we've heard, some of it also, climate is a sense of inspiration or a source of inspiration for solutions. And that is interesting. And maybe it also introduces a different approach to peace and peace building. If we look at climate change, and it's almost like the shift Copernicus had, where we realized that the Earth is not in the center of the solar system, but the sun is. So much so also humanity is not in the center, but life itself is. And there's this repositioning, thinking about peace and peace building and conflict from such a perspective, which I think we can draw from all these climate narratives that are sort of in the undercurrent of these stories. I don't know if any of the authors might want to respond to that, if you find it interesting, but that's a sort of undercurrent theme that spans across many of these stories. Anybody who wants to respond or comment? If there's silence, I'll share the other one as well quickly. And that's something I found very interesting. There's the intergenerational aspect and an important voice of the younger people leading the discussion, or at the very least seen as equals in creating the future. But then there's also this interesting thing about, at the same time, returning to indigenous knowledge, which in a sense links to older people. And it links to identity. It might lead to climate, ways of living in the habitat, ways of respecting the environment, etc. And this is not about the tension between old and young. It's a little bit more about how can one simultaneously include the young or youth and young voices, but honoring and draw from that which is indigenous and ancient. And so that's an interesting aspect as well. So if anybody wants to comment on any of these two, which I think are sort of undercurrents from some of these stories, anyone about the old versus young or old with young, and then also maybe something about climate. Any comments on that?
Well, Johan, maybe I can speak about the indigeneity and about the intergenerational themes, particularly in my story. I think that when we were undergoing the workshops on writing our visions of the future, what really struck me was how in indigenous communities, what they focus on is taking care of the land because they want to preserve it for future generations. And this is the kind of mindset that I took with me when I was writing that story. And that's something that we can see in most cultures and societies that are not so, shall I say, urbanized, or not so focused on progress, growth, and development. They focus instead on being at peace with the land, and not just with each other as human beings, but also with the other living creatures on the planet. And I think that that's a common theme in the stories, which is very telling of how we see peace, not just amongst humans, but amongst different species as well.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, your story explored it in depth, and you actually went into a second order world beyond the future of the future, and the complications around that, which I think was very well done. So this is really a little bit of a new approach or a new understanding perspective around peace building that goes away from the conventional, which I think is where we're at. Olga.
Yeah, and I wanted to add some thoughts on the first one about the climate change and climate awareness, which is interesting about the storytelling methods we were offered to employ, is that, for example, for me, it wasn't an intention to write the story connected with climate change and climate crisis, but it came naturally. And I guess this is what really demonstrates us what do we think about those topics and how they a background for all the other activities we have today. So that's why it is also the topic that connected all the stories. Definitely it's there every time.
Thank you, Olga. Marcella, you also have your hand up.
Thanks, Johan. And to your earlier observation about climate as a common thread throughout our stories, it brings out the notion that perhaps we live in a time of polycrisis or permacrisis, which is something that I also sought to explore in my story alongside other challenges, and given the work that I've been doing in nuclear security and bringing that out and how these things intersect. And it's not just about one crisis at a time, but multiple things happening on multiple different levels that are being explored in that future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One interesting comment is the fact that what happens with climate, it's limited resources, and it makes me think of Jim Dator's different archetypes of the future. And in a sense, we all have a disciplined scenario or future where we have limited resources. And we always saw disciplined scenarios as something that's maybe a little bit negative, but it's interesting how it shifts to a positive, in more of a positive feel to the stories, except maybe Nicole's in a second order implication of that. But that's also interesting how our disciplined scenario actually might be hopeful. Bezir.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and what a wonderful work. Each presenter took us to different worlds. I think you should consider it your duty to take part in such activities. I have been involved in futures just as a reader from 20 years ago, and only in the last 10, 12 years got more actively involved. So and it's interesting, Marcella, being a working on nuclear security, but the consequences of environmental damage and environmental consequences could be on a nuclear scale. And in that regards, perhaps the technology that we were using for security is now turning into protecting the environment. In 2021, took part in a workshop and provided the ideas of employing what's known as intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, those assets against forest fires, damages to the environment, so that you have a situational awareness of what is happening. And with it comes an accountability. So it's, I guess, a lot of different communities are going to merge together. Thank you.
Well, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing how something gets repurposed and the uses change over time. So we're gonna continue. Next up, we've got Anastasia, which she's a marketing strategist and sociologist and trend watching specialist. And she initiated this project and managed and coordinated this. And then with her also Pavel Luksha, and he's the founder of Global Education Futures and also co-founder of the Weaving Lab and Living Cities Earth, where they connect future visioning and systems transformation across various sectors. And what they will do is they'll share a little bit the rationale behind the Peaceful Futures white paper and roadmap, and then make some connections from the stories as well. Anastasia and Pavel, I'm handing over to you.
I would like to just add quickly that Pavel is a driving force of our project, and he will be the main speaker in this part.
Thank you, Anastasia, and thank you, everyone. What a treat, I would say. Indeed, the Peaceful Futures Initiative had multiple objectives. So one of them was to envision inspiring futures that we can live towards. But we also sought ways in which we could prototype different tools that future scholars and futurists are well aware of, but that are rarely used in peacemaking work. Can we apply them practically? Can we create that positive vision that can be then enacted? And part of our task was actually to support civic societies that can derive ideas from these inspiring futures to do right now for activists, social entrepreneurs, educators, artists that really counteract these destructive forces and build up towards what we can call positive peace, peace that is strategic, that is rooted in our societies. So part of our journey was to connect the foresight work, which Anastasia presented earlier, road mapping, which was done with the support of our colleagues from Future Worlds group, which works with the method called structural democratic dialogue, and I will mention that in a moment. And then based on that, create some narratives, some inspiring stories, which can show us, okay, this is the way to move into the positive future. So 3 outputs that you can later download at Next Generation Foresight Practitioners website, our white paper, roadmap, and manifesto are all part of the same project. And they are kind of seeding of the exploration that we would like to continue with all of you. So structural democratic dialogue, I would like to mention in particular, this is the method that has been used in some of peacemaking work around the globe. And it actually is organized as a way of structuring ideas that can lead to some inspiring and positive collective outcomes. So we together have identified over 60 different projects, that some of which are now being catalyzed through this work. And we try to identify which of them are enablers for other projects. So this allows to build up roadmaps with some priorities. We can build up first, focus on projects that are most essential for bringing global peace, and then seeing them as enablers, bring other projects into the work. Next slide, please. So one key conclusion that maybe is obvious to those of you who are working in peacemaking is that peace is not a single dimensional, let's say, affair. It's something that cannot be brought just by political negotiations. It's actually, and if we want to move towards peace-based civilization, this transition is much more, let's say, comprehensive. It requires collective learning and co-evolution from many different players, local governments, global supranational institutions, businesses, NGOs, educational sector. So many players. Most importantly, peace is coming from within. So it's something that needs to be cultivated as culture of peace. And without that, we cannot expect that political or business elites will help us transit there. Next slide, please. So we have identified 3 critical drivers of moving towards peaceful futures and several enablers. The critical drivers are, of course, cultivation of what we can call collective consciousness, the quality of planetary consciousness or empathic qualities within our society. Democratization is really essential because most people don't want war, and if they're empowered to decide, then let's say society is more likely to live in peace. Centralization of control over technologies is another source of strategic conflicts and system violence, and decentralization of technologies is actually something that enables conditions for global peace. So these are key drivers, and in addition to that, enablers are transformation of economic structures, because as we know, economy is actually the key root for systemic violence in our society. And if we start breaking down unfair supply chains, monopolies that are kind of rekindling conflicts, if we begin repurposing military-industrial complex, one of the ideas was to move towards a new purpose of industrial complex focus on climate change and other issues. That is a transition that can enable a peace-based civilization. And healing of deep roots of conflicts in our society is really essential for making sure that these conflicts never happen in the future. Next slide, please. So out of that came out what we call the roadmap to peaceful futures, where we can see that actually by enacting work that requires collaboration and strategic projects across the spectrum of different lines of work, including transformation of governance, transformation of economies, and transformation of our culture, we can see that actually it is a possible transition to be effected, the transition to peace-based future. And really, if you look at this at this roadmap, a lot of these transitions are also transitioned in the economic model, for example, to renewable energy, to circular economy, that are part of the necessary transition towards stopping our war with the planet, stopping our war between human populations, stopping this war within ourselves. Next slide, please. We also mapped out the initiatives that are most crucial in creating that impact, and we started to see that these initiatives are largely related to education and to giving voice to next generations, because young people obviously are also interested in living in global and peaceful societies rather than going in war and dying for, let's say, purposes that are not even defined by them. So emphasizing those elements of the decision-making systems and creating a culture of peace through education is actually the pathway forward that is really enabling a lot of other elements of this roadmap. Next slide, please. So this work that we have done, we see as a seeding for the next, let's say, stages of this work that then now can move to more grounded applications in different places around the world. So one of our tasks in this project going forward is that we are interested in finding, let's say, different spaces where especially young leaders can lead conversations about peaceful futures on a local level, so that this visioning becomes grounded and actual alliances for peacemaking are being built in different parts of the world. And our coalition is actually very interested to support this process, and that will be, let's say, one of our next steps in practical action. We also received a lot of interest from the United Nations, which is now redefining its agenda for security, moving away from, let's say, 20th century security, which was mostly about superpowers not going into nuclear conflict, into more strategic human security. And the roadmap that we offered is part of this new agenda for UN human security. So last point I wanted to make is that this work is only starting. We call it phase one. So moving into the future together, we would like to invite you to look into multiple opportunities to engage with us. First of all, you can get acquainted with the work that we have done, and please provide your feedback. It's really invaluable. Please share the stories about this possibility, because more people know about this work, more people get inspired about possibility of moving to strategic peace, peace for all, let's say more probable it is. Also, we think that by integrating this perspective in educational work, this is something that allows really to start enacting this roadmap in reality even today. And last but not least, like we say, this approach is a prototype that we would like to root in different locations. So let's begin working on this together. So if you have an actual, let's say, situation that you're working with, please reach out to us and let's think how we can apply this method in your region, in your territory. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Anastasia, Oh, yeah, Pavel, who's going next? Would it be me or Anastasia? Do you want to comment as well?
I think, Johan, we can move on. We
Okay.
agreed that I will speak
Okay.
on both of us.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Pavel. So what we're going to do now, based on what we just heard and also our immersive experiences, is two things actually simultaneously. In the chat, you'll see the shortcut. This is to a mirror board. And on the mirror board, we're actually asking essentially two questions. The first one is, given your preferred future and also inspired by the storyteller scenarios, what would be one thing that needs to happen in the next 30 years for us to achieve a peaceful future? So if you go on the mirror board, and I see many of you are there already, there's 4 columns, and the first column essentially is the first question. Then there's 3 other columns as well, which deals with the second question, which asks, how do you think you could use the Peaceful Futures Project white paper and manifesto in your life, your community, and your country? And we're just eager to hear your thoughts. So I'm going to give 2 or 3 minutes just to open up that link, the mirror board link you can see there, and then just add your comments. So just take any of those stickies and just add comments. And then after that 2 or 3 minutes, I would also open up the floor. Actually, we suggest that if you've got any questions for the authors themselves or for Pavel or Anastasia about the white paper, the roadmap, etc., please add that into the chat. And then we will spend about 10 to 15 minutes having a conversation on what you're asking in the chat, giving people the opportunity to answer. And here and there, we might, if we have time, also look at what's on the mirror board. But first, please go to the mirror board and just add some of your thoughts. And I can see there's a lot of things happening as well. Thank you already. Thank you for everybody who's there. So we give you about, it's 31 minutes past. Let's keep this until about 33, 34 minutes. Great. So please continue adding your thoughts here. But I also now want to open up the chat space so that if you have any questions reflecting on the scenarios or the stories, the stories, the white paper, anything that's been shared by Pavel or Anastasia, or even about storytelling for ties and how to use that, please add your questions in the chat. Great. It seems as if we're still all occupied on the board, which is totally fine. Yes, Yenhan, it's interesting how bullets and weed links with industries and interests, and lobbying and economy, the whole non-industrial complex, but how there's an economic incentive and power game actually around all these things. If anybody from the team want to highlight anything they read on the board, please feel free to speak. Anything you found interesting or which you just would want to highlight. Yes, the military policing industrial complexes.
Yeah, Johan, I'm looking at this pieces here, like working in inner peace, practice peace in daily life, even getting more familiar with the peace building context and concept. I was wondering if people, after looking at the stories and, participating in the exercise, how much their own concept of peace had changed from this exercise and this workshop today.
Yes, I would be interested to hear that as well. And linking to that, if I look at the columns, we don't have a lot in the country area. And maybe it's because of the nature of, the products and what we have. But at the same time, I wonder if there's something about agency, which links to what you just said. Do we feel we have agency to make a difference on that level? But anyone who wants to comment or open up a conversation, we have time. So you're welcome to just, and I really open the floor to anybody who wants to respond or just add to the conversation.
Hi, this is Jan Hurwitz from Costa Rica, and I would just like to say that I think that this process, which continually emphasizes the systemics, is very helpful, and that when we work on this together, I call it in Spanish, the common denominator. What are the common denominators we're looking at, no? So this continues to move the neurons in the right direction. And as we go into schools and into other areas to work on this, not to, we can focus on details, but also the systemics.
Thank you, Jan. It's exactly that, the common denominator in systems, also the attractor, and where the energy flows towards, and that's also links a little bit with what Pavel has on the drivers, the whole evolution of collective consciousness, Pavel, which was your first one of your first points, which is a little bit at a deeper systemic level. Let's see what's in the chat, but you're welcome to just unmute yourself and talk. Please do. Anybody from the team who wants to maybe highlight something you find interesting, or anybody who wants to speak up on their one of their specific post-its?
I would like to speak not on the post-its, but just in general.
Yes.
Thanks to the internet information, and if you are a skillful user of information, and better yet, if you have good open source intelligence skills, it's unbelievable the kind of things you can uncover. I have taken NATO building integrity training that focuses on corporate ethics and security sector reform, and you are specifically encouraged to actually, announce whatever irregularity or corruption you come across to. So in that regards, the things may be happening, and especially in many, many different sectors. The biggest problem is corruption. which, whether it's on the state side or on the private sector, that prevents the truth from coming. But obviously, it's kind of like very much a Star Wars movie. So in that regards, just as there are bad actors, there are equally good actors. So it's about really networking and liaising with people. So in that regards, to bring it out. And better yet, even if you don't have the courage, at least you'll be able to get counseling and motivation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bashir.
Johan, I'm curious about the masculinity post-it here, because one of the stories that Kushal brought to us so beautifully talks about the masculinity, and Jen commented about the systemic issues around this. Maybe I'm biased because I work with gender, but yeah, I think masculinity is really something that is really important to be touched on in peace building. So I don't know if Kushal or anyone else that brought this post-it to the Miro wants to comment.
I mean, I'm curious to know whose posted that is, as opposed to me blabbering on. I mean, I've already kind of given my spiel, but yeah, people think about that topic as well as other ones.
Yeah, that was. I mean, unless others put them down as well, that's one of the ones I contributed. That comes, I think, in many ways from a personal place of just seeing how so many of the cultures and norms that contribute to scarcity mindset, aggression, they also show up in like the daily, just like socialization of men in my culture, and how that feels like an opportunity for change that can start kind of close to home and with the youngest people who haven't yet been too formed into that. So I'd love to hear, Kushal, more about what you wrote and shared.
Do we do that here, or do we do that kind of at a separate point? I'm not sure like how much time we've got to kind of elaborate on that, Johan and Thijs.
Michelle, you're welcome to respond if you want to.
I mean, to obviously stories online, and I'm happy to kind of share more about mine. I mean, similar in some ways, it is kind of inspired by a personal journey as well. Like, obviously there's creative license in there, but like I've kind of tried to show the churn and the difficulty in accepting a churn when one tries to engage with their masculinity and transform it. And I think that's what I tried to show in the story, is that with the kind of bittersweet ending to it, which Tess and I have kind of spoken a little bit about, is why can't we have this now? Why do we have to wait for it? And also almost like a kind of realization that once one grapples with things which might not be so good in there, how that contributes to, violence across society, oppression across society, their own policing of their own emotions and the way they behave with one another, etc. That kind of sense of almost grieving a past that could have been, right? So I kind of try to give that sense at the end of the story. But yeah, I mean, it's something which, as people are interested in peace building, it should be right up there on the agenda when it comes to, education and who's in the room when we're making policy making decisions. I mean, it's, we can't not think about that question of gender, right? And obviously not just with regards to cis-het masculinity either. All the intersections at play here. So yeah, no, thank you for the question.
Thank you, Kushal. That's very interesting. And obviously we not contrast, but masculine, feminine duality, or the two the two genders, or there's obviously more views on gender in any case. But I wonder, there's something about the environment, and I would want to bring the environment into the gender conversation, because that's the Greek word Gaia, and that's a different thing, which also obviously stands as an opposite in many ways to a masculine understanding of what our economies and our world views have been in the past, which is interesting. But I'm not an expert on this, Kushal. I'll leave that to you. But I just want to mention, it's got an environmental connotation as well, in terms of what's emerging and where we're moving towards, which obviously links strongly to the feminine as well. I think we need to move on. So I'm going to hand over to Abby again. And Abby will introduce us from somebody from Humanity, Lexi from Humanity United. And they sponsored this whole project, really. So Abby, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Johan. And I think Lexi's already, in a way, introduced herself by jumping in and asking that question of Kushal and reflecting on her own personal kind of the provocations that have come up for her as a result of this. But just to give everyone a little bit of context, Humanity United is a US-based funder. They're part of the Amidia group, and they have a number of different funding areas, which include peace building. SWAF has had a relationship with Humanity United for a number of years, and Lexi and her team very kindly wrote to us last year to say that they'd be up for sponsoring the white paper and the roadmap, which you've seen today, as well as the manifesto. So huge thanks to you, Lexi. And as one of the leads in the peace building team, I'm really excited to hear from you and your perspectives, both from the personal perspective and the organizational perspective, but also I know that we've got those from the peace building space very explicitly in this room, but we've also got those that are newer to it. So also excited to hear some of your reflections on how this resonates with what you're seeing from the sector more broadly. So I've just got a couple of questions for you, but I wonder if we could start. I'd love to hear what you've taken away from today and some of the interesting things as you have read the stories and the white paper that you'd like to share.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to share a few words. I hope it's offering something into this space. My name's Lexi. I'm based in Washington, D.C. As Abby mentioned, I work with Humanity United, which seeks to cultivate the conditions for enduring freedom and peace. And through our peace building portfolio, we support efforts to support the agency and power of those working proximately to conflict in their own communities in order to create peace. So that's kind of the professional place I come from. But I think first a personal reflection is just on the courage that it takes to share a story of a future. I think particularly in the peace building field, or when you're talking about really existential crises related to humanitarian needs or climate, there's like the tyranny of the practical of what we can do now in these urgent moments that I think push out the space to be creative and to offer up something that's a world that's based on different norms and different values, and that offers something that's hard to conceive in these moments. So I just want to thank those who have contributed stories for their courage to do so. And it's not an easy thing to break through. So I really appreciate that. And I did want to share that I was recently in a convening with a group of peace and security funders. And what really came out from that, it was a 3-day annual meeting. We used a unconference method, so designed the agenda together through the week, which was really interesting. But one of the themes that really came out was the tension between the practical, the urgent, and the creative and imaginative, and how sometimes what we consider practical and possible limits our ability to create the future we really need. And then also heard lots of stories of people working both globally, locally, and everywhere in between to create those futures and step out of what's practical or possible from our constrained minds. So this feels really timely in that way. There's so many conversations happening in the peace building field about the need to change and shift. And I think these kinds of reflections offer something for us to grab onto and start the conversation from there.
Thanks, Lexi, and also speaks, that really resonates. I've heard from a number of those in the peace building space, the need for alternative narratives and thinking about peace building differently, as well as creating those spaces. How does this resonate with you in terms of where Humanity United is going, and particularly within the peace building team?
Yeah, absolutely. So we recently released an organizational strategy, which focuses on cultivating conditions, as I mentioned, and the three conditions that we named as the ones that we need to focus on across our work are agency. That's just agency of people. And I think there's something about this storytelling and telling a story from the first person about that person's own agency in this space is really aligned with that. The second is accountable institutions. So that's kind of from more the governance perspective of like, how do we reform institutions to kind of create space for agency, but also to be functioning in a way that supports the goals that they're meant to function. And the third is shared humanity, which really resonates with a lot of the values that underlined all of these stories. I think one thing that in our peace building work, especially that we're shifting more and more toward is holding space for emergence. So creating spaces for participatory processes in communities, across local communities, to learn together, to try new things, to invest in their own well-being so that they can kind of build the future together. I was really struck by the distinction between drivers and enablers that was mentioned in the white paper recap. And I think in a lot of ways, the peace building professional field often focuses on the enablers. So what are the structures? What is the governance that's needed? Even just like, we need war to stop, we need the guns to be put down in order to move forward. But a lot of the things that we do to stop war, to have accountable institutions, is only the first step that allows people to kind of exhale, to enter into this new mindset and this new frame, to have a sense of abundance rather than scarcity, and have the opportunity to work together to build the future and to build peace. And I do want to call on, there was two quotes from the stories told that really resonate with that. One from Olga, so you've been successful in creating peace. Will it still be there in another 15 years? And it points to the need to keep that space, to keep making peace over and over. Conflict isn't something that ends, but is transformed. And if we have the skills to manage it, that's what will enable that peace to keep moving forward. And the last quote that I'll name that I think is really important to hold on to is, I didn't catch it perfectly, but Marcella, like, we called them idealists at the time, but maybe we were the fools. And that points to the piece around creating space for that idealism, because sometimes that's really what's needed in the form of collective action, in the form of social movements that have the power together to build something new.
That's really insightful, thank you. And I think what you shared about balancing that there is a space for idealism, I think, particularly, and sometimes that's needed. And you and I have spoken a few times about the challenges of finding space, particularly for those that are in the peace building work, because it is such an urgent and emergency, such an emergency humanitarian crisis most of the time that people are acting, and it feels like a luxury to be able to take time to look beyond the short term and to also think idealistically. My last question before we close is, what do you think are some of the opportunities or the spaces where this could be a possibility, or these conversations could happen, if you've got any ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think on the formal side, there's a lot of conversation going on in the peace building and adjacent fields about the need to recreate themselves. There's a localization agenda about shifting power and resources to those working in their communities. There's decolonization, which has institutions looking at their own histories and neo-colonial practices. I was just kind of clicking through some things happening in the peace building field. The Alliance for Peace Building conference that just happened in DC was around new architectures for peace. The Geneva Peace Week conference coming up, I think is like new and building for the future. And then the UN has its new agenda for peace. So there's constant conversations happening at the kind of institutional sector level of what's new, what's needed, how do we create the future and the structures we need. So there's a lot of space for these kinds of methods to enter into those conversations, to make sure they're happening in a participatory way that's informed across sectors and through real everyday experience. But then I think from the bottom up level, there's a real reckoning that peace that lasts needs to be built kind of from the inside out, as was named. So also, how do these sort of methodologies and processes open up individuals and communities' own hearts and imaginations together to think about how to live together differently and to spark new ideas. So I think it's kind of like meeting in the middle of the structural reform things, but also how our communities just kind of able to participate in their own creation of the future.
Thank you so much. Really lucky to have you as a supporter, but also have you here today. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Johan, back to you.
Great, thank you. So we're wrapping up now, and we're super excited to keep the conversation going and to make what we have here something that's alive and live and that's being used and that inspire. And so what we would like to ask you is go read the manifesto. There's the link. Read the white paper. And then also fill in this form, which links a little bit with what we asked on Miro in terms of how you think you might use what we have here. But also, there was a lot of comments and questions in the chat, and we don't want to lose that. So if you really want to be involved or in some way or form, continue the conversation, have ideas, etc., please add that to the form. I haven't seen the form myself, but I imagine there might be space for additional comments, etc. So just please feel free and just add, because we don't want to lose what has been said here, even if you've got questions and all your comments. So that's one thing. And then I'm handing over to Abby again, just to talk a little bit more about the NGFP fellowship. Abby.
I'm going to hand to Katie instead, if that's okay. Sorry, Johan.
Yes, Katie.
It's okay. Thanks, Johan. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. So I just wanted to speak briefly about the NGFP fellowship. So a quick whistle-stop tour, the Next Generation Foresight Practitioner Network, which is what NGFP stands for. It's a global network of 600 people across 90 countries using futures and foresight methods in a whole range of different ways. So you've heard for a number of our fellows turned storytellers today. And in addition to this, we're seeing people using foresight methods to inform policy in the climate space in Kenya, to assess our relationship with lunar cycles in India, and so much more. It's an incredibly diverse community that we facilitate. I'll very quickly outline some things, how you can apply to become part of this network, what's in it for you, and also a specific focus on the Peacebuilding Fellowship that's available for the first time this year. So one way to become part of the network is to apply for the fellowship, which is open until the 2nd of June. So you've got a few weeks left to get applications in. To be eligible, you have to be between 18 and 35 years old or have less than 5 years experience working in the foresight sector. Each year we bring in approximately 20 to 30 fellows who are with us for a year-long initial journey to support development of a project or idea using futures and foresight methods. What's in it for you? All our fellows receive a small amount of funding, a dedicated mentor to work with you throughout that first year, capability building and access to free training courses, opportunities to showcase your work and connect as part of the thematic hub. And how do you apply? So it's a super simple application process where you complete a quick profile, answer some questions, upload a video. And in this specific space, I'd like to give emphasis to the Peacebuilding Global Challenge. So one of 7 challenge areas we're focusing on for 2023. So we are specifically looking for practitioners working in this space to apply. There's a higher amount of funded granted for the Global Challenge Fellows and just a greater level of involvement with NGFP and the School of International Futures, which is the organisation that NGFP sits underneath. So as that was such a quick overview, I'm going to share some relevant links and invite anyone interested to learn more to join us for our 3rd and final live Q&A session on the 23rd of May, where you can learn more about the fellowship and ask questions. And the links I'll share are how to apply, read more about the Peacebuilding Global Challenge specifically, a link so you can register for this live Q&A, and then just our email address. So if you have questions, you can get in touch with us directly. So I'll put all of that in the chat now. Thanks, Johan. Back to you.
Great, thank you, Katie. Thank you, everybody, for the team who helped organize this. the storytellers and everybody who used their creative talents to write this. But also I want to take, and we've got 1 minute left, but I just want to take a moment also just to honor the great work all of you have been doing across the world. It's tremendously hopeful and empowering to see people from across the world joining us today. And we just want to honor the work you're doing as well, to create a better future for all of us. So I hope this was also not just inspiring, but also a celebration of who we are and what we hope for. So thank you for joining us, and please stay in touch. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was an awesome session.